Hey guys, it's Anjali from Doodle Quilting Studio back with week 3 of how to choose a long arm quilter. Tonight is going to be short and sweet. We're going to chat about what you need to bring to the long armor, what condition your quilt top needs to be in, batting, backing, etc. I have a little window of time while my kiddos are off with the in-laws, so we're going to chat real quick, and hopefully this will help you kind of get everything prepped when you're ready to drop that quilt off. So the first thing, obviously, is what condition does your quilt top need to be in? I always ask people when I am taking quilts in, one thing that really helps the quilter is trim all those loose threads. So I know sometimes it's like we're speeding through the quilt, we're just trying to get it done. We have a deadline or a baby shower or something like that. We're just trying to get it done. But trimming all those loose threads will really help the long armor, because if they're left on the quilt, sometimes they get tangled in other threads, or if the long armor's like me, I stop and I trim all those as I go, and then really what happens is that it just takes me a little bit longer to finish the quilt if I'm having to trim all those threads as I go. So trimming those threads off before you drop the quilt off is definitely a good idea. The other thing is I always ask clients to have the quilt top freshly pressed. I know that, sometimes if you're dropping it off and there's a little bit of a delay as far as when you're going to get the quilt back, sometimes it'll be folded for a little while. But if it comes in freshly pressed, that keeps, any big wrinkles out and things like that. If I've had a quilt for a while, then I give it a quick press before I load it. But a fresh ironing for the quilt top really can make a difference. The next thing is if the quilt is going to go, if there's a definite top or a bottom to the quilt, definitely mark that either on the quilt or, when the long armor's taking the quilt from you, let them know, hey, this is the top of the quilt, make sure this goes pointing up. Because if you have a specific orientation of the quilt and the long armor doesn't know that, then they can't guarantee that they're going to load it that way. Or if you want, if your design, your quilting design is directional, then you definitely want it pointing the right way on your quilt. So those are good practices for the quilt top condition, just making sure that everything is set to go. There's not going to be any hang-ups. Now the next thing obviously is batting, and we talked a little bit about batting last week. But if you're going to buy the batting from the quilter, then you obviously don't have to worry about this part. You just let them know what you want, and then it's their job to supply it when they're ready to start the quilt. If you're bringing batting, usually I'll ask people if they're bringing me batting, if it's packaged batting. I prefer that it stays in the package when it comes to me. If you've purchased batting off the roll, then just neatly fold it, and set it in a stack with the quilt top and backing is how I like to accept it. So that's really going to depend on the quilter. I would say just ask them if they have a preference on how they get batting, and then you can plan accordingly. So the quilt backing. Okay, so the quilt backing, this is usually where I, as the long armor, have more questions typically. How do they accept backing? I know that there are some long armors that say specifically that they don't accept minky, or they don't accept sheets, or they don't accept certain things for backing. So be sure to check those things. If the quilter has a website, make sure to look that up, and that way you don't show up with a certain backing and they can't accept it because either they're not comfortable quilting that, or they just they have a reason for not accepting a certain type of backing. So just double check that. Make sure you know what they accept, that they're going to accept what you're bringing them. The other thing that I make sure I ask clients is if you have pieced your backing, which way you prefer the seam. So if there's a seam perfectly in the middle, do you want that lined up vertically or horizontally? How do you want that seam? Or if they don't care, then I'll just load it, however it best fits the quilt. And most of the time, that's kind of how it comes out is, okay, how is this going to fit the quilt? And that's how it gets loaded. So if you don't have a preference, let them know that too. Again, with the backing, I ask that it's been freshly pressed. If you have a seam in the back, I like the seam to be ironed open. It just kind of It helps decrease some of the bulk right there in the seam, so you don't get any, weird puckers or weird quilting or anything like that right over the seam of that backing. Let's see. So the other thing, it would be how do they want to receive it? Because we're quilting on a long arm, all of those pieces are getting loaded separately. So what I'll ask folks to do is to, iron everything, neatly fold the backing as one piece, fold the batting as one piece if they're bringing it, and then iron and neatly fold the top as one piece, and then just put them in a stack and bring them to me that way. And that way I have them already separated when I'm ready to load them. So just double check that you're bringing things to the quilter in the way that they need. It'll just save them some time when they get ready to load it. It'll save them, if they have to do any extra work because the backing or a piece of it's not prepared properly. I know that I have what's called a quilter's inconvenience fee. And so that's a fee I charge if I have to end up doing any repairs on the backing or anything like that. So if somebody's brought me backing and it's got a hole in it, or it needs to be squared up or something like that. So definitely double check those things when you're getting ready, when you're preparing your quilt to drop off to the long armor. Okay, so one other question I get asked a lot is extra backing. So how much extra backing do you need to have when you take a quilt to the long armor? Now, typically most quilters are going to ask you for an extra couple inches. I usually ask for at least 4 extra inches all the way around the quilt, so all sides. What that does is it allows me to have some extra room, obviously, when I load the quilt onto the leaders of the long arm, because you do lose a little bit of the backing when you load it. So the extra on the top and the bottom helps with loading. The extra on the sides helps. Most long armors have clamps that they put onto the sides of the quilt to help keep the quilt taut and straight on the sides. So that's why they're asking for that extra backing fabric. It's not because they want you to spend extra money. It's because we really do appreciate that extra fabric to ensure that the top fits appropriately onto the backing. But not only that, sometimes we need to test our thread or something like that. So I know some other quilters use some of that extra space if we're trying to make sure that the tension looks good before we actually jump right onto your quilt, because nobody wants bad tension. Nobody wants test stitches on the actual quilt. So that's what that extra backing's for. Really does help the long armor if you adhere to their policy on how much extra backing they want. Now, the other thing is squaring your backing. That really is important, because when we go to load the quilt on the long arm, a lot of times we can't tell until we get the quilt loaded whether it's square or not. Once it's loaded and we start rolling up the backing fabric onto our leaders, onto the bars of the long arm, then we can tell that it's not square. And then if we have to take it off and square it, then that's obviously more time that we're spending doing prep work that we could have been working on your quilt. And some quilters might have, like I have what's called a quilter's inconvenience fee, which means that if I have to square up your backing, or I have to repair holes in your backing or things like that, then I will charge you extra. So that's something to be sure of. Check those policies with that quilter. Make sure that you know, again, how they want it prepped. Make sure that you've done a good job piecing the backing if you're piecing the backing. Press the seams however the quilter is asking you to press them. And that way you don't run into any of those extra fees. And what I'll do, Sometimes Crafter, Christina over at Sometimes Crafter, she has a great page on quilt prep and also a little tutorial on how to square your backing. So I'll put that link in for you guys so you can head over and check out her information. Check out her portfolio too, because she does some really cool stuff. She's one that does some of those really neat custom computerized designs. It's very cool. So I'll put that link up so you guys can head over there and check out some of that information. I know how people ask me a lot how to square up the backing. That's one of the most popular questions. So that tutorial over there will give you some good information on how to do that. Okay. So the next thing is threads, and typically most long armors are going to have thread. So we talked about some different types of thread last week and how to make some of those decisions. Again, that's something that the specific long armor can help you with. But one question that people ask me is, am I allowed to choose the thread? And when I'm going through my intake process with the client, I will typically ask them if they have a preference on the thread color, the thread type. I just did a quilt where a gal asked me, or I guess the person that the quilt was for was allergic to polyester, and so we opted to go with a cotton thread just to be safe. So things like that, if you have a preference, speak up about them. Okay, so let's chat real quick about thread color. So choosing thread color, that's something that you can definitely chat with the particular quilter about if you're doing multiple colors or just one color or things like that. The big thing again is to be willing to trust the quilter a little bit with some of the thread color choices, because we make some of those decisions based on the type of quilting that we're doing. So if we're using the quilting to add texture, draw the attention to something, but not necessarily make the quilting the first thing that you see, we're going to choose the color a little bit differently maybe than maybe what you're thinking you want. We're going to choose a color that blends a little bit more instead of standing out a little bit. So definitely be willing to trust the quilter a little bit, and we're trying to give you back a quilt that our quilting has enhanced the beauty of it. We definitely don't want to take away from all the wonderful work you've already done. And so that definitely plays into our choices when we're going through the list of threads that we are thinking we might use on your quilt. So just something to keep in mind as far as thread goes. Now the last thing is, if you have any ideas or pictures or things like that, specific ideas about how you want your quilt to look, bring those. And again, in my intake process, I will ask the client if they have any specific ideas. So any specific ideas, any specific thread, things like that. If you have a particular idea and you're like, I think this would look really cool, in this block or in this border or whatever, speak up about it. And that's something too that I would think that if the quilter can get on board with, then they can execute that. Just be sure that that's something they can execute. I know that I try to be really upfront if someone's asking for something that I think is out of my skill set. And so that's something that, if you're looking for someone to do, some real intricate, detailed quilting, again, that's part of that choosing process, is figuring out if they have a preference for that, or if they, what their offering is. Be sure to kind of look through that, and that will kind of help with that process. If you're bringing them something specific and you're telling them, hey, this is what I think I want in this particular area. And that kind of touches on another thing that I think long armers struggle with, because we get clients, and I know that, some of you out there, you're just like, do whatever you want, whatever you want is just fine. I don't have a preference. And I know for me, and I don't know if this is the case for other long armers, from the ones I've talked to, that sometimes this becomes a problem for them, is that when a client brings me a quilt that they've spent time and money and, energy, they poured themselves into it, and they bring it to me and they say, do whatever you want, I kind of cringe, because I'm like, ooh, the style of quilting that I like might not be exactly the style of quilting that you like. And so typically when people ask me that, I'll try and kind of qualify what you're asking for, and we'll kind of talk through it a little bit more, because I know one of my first experiences with quilting was asking somebody to do some quilting for me, and they did a beautiful job, but the scale of the quilting was a lot larger than what I wanted. But because I didn't specify, density or anything like that, and the person didn't ask me, I didn't know that I needed to say it. I didn't know, that was something that I maybe wasn't going to like. So that's something that hopefully the quilter, they'll kind of go through that with you. They'll qualify that. And if you're the client bringing the quilt, just if you have some ideas, definitely feel free to be open with it. If you really truly don't care, then you feel free to say whatever you want to do. Just be open to the fact that when you get it back, that there may be something on there that you're not totally sure about. But again, as long armors, our goal is to give you back something that our quilting has enhanced the beauty of it, and we've added to it in a good way that you hopefully love. So, so those are some ideas on what things you need to bring to the quilter, condition of the top, the batting, the backing, how you need to bring those. Again, these might be specific things that you can talk to the particular long armor about. But otherwise, hopefully this has helped you in that prep process, help you get everything ready to take to the Longarm Quilter. And we will be back next week to chat about how long armors charge for quilting services. So I know this is, again, a question that I get asked a lot. Oh, hey, can you give me a quick quote on what would you charge to do, an edge to edge on this baby quilt or whatever. And so we'll go into some detail on how long armors charge, how to do some estimating on your own. And when a quilter says, oh, well, that really depends, it really does depend. So we'll go into some more detail next week on charges for long arm services. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my kid-free time. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.